and today we will present about international entry strategy.
Let's start.
Recent change in the market have meant that more and more companies are expanding their operation to other parts of the world. Have you ever wondered how international works is business? For instance, do you know which strategy a firm can choose from when deciding how to sell its goods, services outside of its domestic market? In this presentation, we will analyze the international entry mode, also known as international strategy, and we also provide you the answer to the question. When a firm decides to enter a foreign market, the question regarding the best strategy inevitably arises. Generally, firm can choose one of 5 different modes to enter foreign markets: exporting, licensing, joint venture, franchising, and holding on subsidiary in the host country. Its entry strategy headed on advantages and disadvantages, and manager needs to consider these pros and cons carefully when deciding which strategy to use. In this video, we will explain the various entry strategies along with their respective advantages and disadvantages.
Right now, we start with importing. Exporting meaning sending goods products in one country to sell them in another country. Exporting is a low-risk strategy that business find justified for several reasons. First, multiple products in domestic market may find their broad opportunity overseas. Second, some firms find it less risky and more profitable to export existing products and take up developing new one. Third, firms that faces no domestic demand may choose to market their foreign import to balance out seasonal demand in their revenue stream. And finally, some firms may export because there is less competition overseas. Smaller firms often choose exporting over other strategy because it's offering a degree of control over risk, cost, and resource commitment. Smaller firms often only export in response to an unsolicited overseas order, which is also perceived as low risk. Here are the advantages and disadvantages of importing. Advantages of importing such as extending to global scale, increased profits, risk mitigation, increased competitiveness and market share, economy of scale, and government support. Disadvantages of importing such as supply chain disruption, high upfront cost, export license and documentation, product adaptation, political disruption, and cultural hostility. Supply chain disruption. Influx COVID-19 pandemic and the consequent disruption in supply chain deflation pose risk to the success of business. Products that fail to reach the higher result in unhappy customer and refund costing business unnecessarily. Cultural hostile is planning to import to a country with totally different culture, then diversity restore to culture understanding is paramount. Language barrier and cultural custom can prolong hostile for new business, and if the business doesn't adjust to the cultural status quo, it would cost the business its success.
The second entry strategy, what I want to say today is licensing. A license is a legal term under which a person is allowed to use a product. In business, licensing is a business agreement involving two companies. One with the other special permission, such as using patent, invention, formulas, processes, design, copyright, and trademark, and in exchange for payment. Licensing requires very little investment and can provide a high return on investment. The licensing will also take care of any manufacturing and marketing costs in the foreign market. So what are the benefits of licensing? I think licensing has three clear advantages. The first advantage I think is income without overhead. Often licensing allows licensees to generate income without taking on heavy overhead and production costs. The second advantage I think is potentially better marketing. For example, by licensing your IP to a smaller business, you will benefit from more targeted marketing without having to conduct individualized market research. The final advantage I think is the ability to enter foreign markets more easily. You don't need to worry about anything since you are not shipping product overseas. You are just letting foreign entity use your IP. This is highly attractive for companies that are new in international business. However, there is some disadvantage as well of licensing, and that is the reason why companies should take care of it. Firstly, I think is the first disadvantage is no warranty of revenue. If the licensee fails to generate any profit from your IP, then you will get no revenue. The second of disadvantage I think is risk of diminished reputation. If your licensing doesn't conduct business in an ethical manner, you may take a hit to your reputation. The final disadvantage I think is potential conflict. Licensing also expose you to potential conflict with your licensees, particularly if they try withholding revenue from you. Next, I will take an example of aviation industry in Vietnam. Example, by the end of 2021, Vietnam Airlines licensed to fly direct regularly to United States. With this event, Vietnam Airlines had become the first and only Vietnamese airline to be allowed to operate regular direct flights to the US. This is the first step in Vietnam Airlines is exploring the US-Vietnam market. It contributes to affirming the quality of service and capacity to ensure flight safety of Vietnam Airlines flight in particular and Vietnam's aviation sector to general. Overall, I think licensing is a great way to enter international market.
The classic definition of a joint venture is a business arrangement in which two or more companies combine resources on a project or service. Participant companies typically agree to split any profits the venture creates. As a result, joint venture are potentially advanced out for companies in need of advanced resources with minimal or no infusion of capital. Beyond the legal definition, what is a joint venture really? The key is just you will be working with another entity from different companies, and in order to complete your sale, you will need to check them. Just must be all. You will be working closely with their individuals for what could be a lengthy amount of time. Are they the sort who may betray you? You will need to do your homework when the respect of a partnership first arise and decide whether or not they deserve your trust. And next, what are the advantages of a joint venture? Here are 12 advantages. 1. New insight and expertise. 2. Better resources. 3. It is only temporary. 4. Multiply set the risks and costs. In case the joint group project fails, you are not alone with bearing the cost of its failure. Because your two have volunteered to share the expenses, your board will also support the losses. 5. Joint venture can be flexible. 6. Get a way to exit a joint venture. 7. You will know what you are and will be able to sell it. 8. You are more likely to success. 9. You will build relationships and networks. 10. Your potential will virtually be limitless. Despite having little to no money at your disposal, you can create more venture deals in process. You will create momentum and have a partner with you. Take advantage of it. 11. You get to save money by sharing advertising and marketing costs. Finally, international joint venture eradicate the risk of discrimination. The opposite of the child advantage is child disadvantage. The first major objectives. The objectives of joint venture are not 100% clear and rarely communicate clearly to all people involved. The second, flexibility can be restricted. The third, there is no shutting up an equal involvement. For example, Company A is working on the production process, whereas Company B is responsible for the production, and Company C is in charge of planning and implementing market strategies. Since Company A is not directly involved in the production and promotes process the result on the latter companies, it will also affect individual business. And 4. Rest imbalance. 5. Closed cultures. 6. Limited outside opportunities. 7. A lot of research and planning are necessary. 8. It may be hard for you to exit the partnership as there is a contract involved. 9. You may be tempted to leave the joint venture. 10. Lack of clear communication. 11. Unreliable partners. And 12. Unclear and unrealistic objectives. And what are the risks of joint ventures? No business venture comes without risks. The main risk of the joint venture is that when something goes wrong, both sides are held accountable rather than only the party who was at fault. While most business entering joint venture agreements are limited liability companies, small business participants are equally responsible for legal claims arising from the joint venture, regardless of its level of involvement or profits from venture. The following is a good example of success when entering a venture. Ford and Toyota began working together in 2011 to develop hybrid trucks. Toyota brings the hybrid technology qualities while Ford brings its leadership in the American truck market. The perfect example of a joint venture created for access to advertising and intellectual property. My presentation here is the end, and next franchising.
Ngọc has presented the joint venture session. Next, I would like to present one of the methods of entering of the international markets with franchising. So what is franchising? Franchising means buying into an existing business and having the right to use an existing business idea. Besides that, franchising is basically a specialized form of licensing in which the franchisor not only sell intellectual property to the franchisee, but also insist that the franchisee agree to abide by strict rules regarding how they do business. The franchisee business model consists of two operating partners, the franchisor and the franchisee. The franchisor means the franchisor or parent companies mean a company or organization that gives somebody a franchise, and franchisees mean a person or a company that has been given a franchise. For example, one of the most famous examples of a franchise is McDonald's. From a modest start, the McDonald's franchise now has more than 36,000 restaurants around the world. Other famous franchise businesses include Burger King, Pizza Hut, Subway, Taco Bell, and more. Have franchises that are owned and managed by local residents in many foreign countries. And that's the advantage as well as the disadvantage of franchising. There are four advantages and two disadvantages. The first advantage of franchising is low risk. Firstly, franchising can reduce a series of cost factors such as the cost of transporting and reserving raw material due to local exploitation, the cost of tariffs, imports and export, or reducing the cost of wage due to high costs, low on-site labor hire. Second, because the rapid development of franchising is associated with expansion of international business scale, the expansion also means the process of reducing the cost per unit of products. For subsidiary company mean franchisee, it doesn't have to take the risk of market penetration and segmentation and avoid early management failure. The second market opportunity. Many franchising systems have successfully penetrated foreign markets without having to make any significant change to predetermine goal and plan. The third advantage is fast expansion. Franchising is faster and cheaper form of expansion than adding company own store because it costs the parent company much less when new stores are owned and operated by a third party. And final advantage of franchising is yield the brand of franchisor. You know that creating a brand for products will take a long time to create. The franchisee will take a lot of time and effort to create close customer. And the first disadvantage of is lot of business freedom. The franchise agreement usually include restriction on how you can run the business. You might not be able to match change to suit your local markets because it's not your brand. Especially the franchisee will be limited. This is not your brand, especially the franchisees will be limited in your ability to create as well as cope with the expected marketing strategies. And the second disadvantage of franchising is low revenue on profits. And usually saying with the franchisor, potential for revenue growth is more limited because the parent companies will only earn a percent the earning from its new store.
The final entry strategy is the construction of a wholly owned subsidiary. This entry mode of international business is preferred by companies which want to exercise full control over their overseas operation. So, what is a wholly owned subsidiary? Wholly owned subsidiary is a company whose 100% stock are held by the other company as known as the parent company. A firm can develop a wholly owned subsidiary through a greenfield venture, meaning that the firm creates the entire operation itself. Another possibility is acquisition, an existing operation from a local company and another foreign operator. Here, let's talk about the expenditure and disadvantage of owning a wholly owned subsidiary. Among the advantages, the most clear one is that you don't have to share anything with anybody. You don't share profit, you don't share knowledge, you don't share know-how, you don't share talent. So in a wholly owned subsidiary, control is absolutely strong and contrary to some of the other entry strategies that we explored before. Second, less risk of losing core technology. When a firm competitive advantage is based on technological competence, a wholly owned subsidiary is often the preferred entry mode because it reduces the risk of losing control over that competence. By having a wholly owned subsidiary, I can also shape the subsidiary in which every way I want, in which every way that is consistent with what the global strategy of the firm is, or consistent what my competitive advantage is. Like let's say, if my competitive advantages are a particular production process, a particular human relation way of conducting business, or a particular patent or copyright, then I just can share and not worry too much about anyone else. Of course, there are several disadvantages. The main one is the one related to cost. With a wholly owned subsidiary, you beyond the cost, and therefore you might be on profit, but you will have due to with you might be on the profit, but you will have due to with on the bad consequence if the venture doesn't go well. Another disadvantage is that it's going to be your own responsibility to adapt to the local markets. And this is something that in the wholly owned subsidiary, this basic maneuver may be relatively limited for us. So wholly owned subsidiary again might give you a lot of control, but of course there are more risky in the sense that you be on the cost of setting holding up. Example, Frito-Lay began in the early 1930s to separate companies, the Frito company and S.W. Lay and Company, with marketing in 1961 to form Frito-Lay Inc. In 1965, Frito-Lay merged with the Pepsi-Cola company, resulting in the formation of PepsiCo. Since then, Frito-Lay has operated a wholly owned subsidiary, PepsiCo. Frito-Lay is an American subsidiary of PepsiCo that manufactures, markets, and sells corn chips, potato chips, and another snack food.
Summary: no on entry mode is considered to be superior to all another.
Depending on the company's requirements, capability, and constraints, the idea of market entry
and the favorite scope of engagement, risk, control, and profit potential. Companies choose from many available market entry modes.
Other entry modes compile different advantages and disadvantages of what company should be aware of before making the choice.
This is the end my team